My name's Jean Sprackland. I'm chair of the judges for the T.S. Eliot Prize this year. It's wonderful to be here. I'm excitedly looking forward to hearing the shortlisted poets read from their work. We have the wonderful Ian Macmillan here as our MC this evening. But before then, in keeping with tradition, I'm going to kick off the evening with a reading from T.S. Eliot himself. It's from the Four Quartets, and it's the opening section of the Dry Salvages. I do not know much about gods, but I think that the river is a strong, brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable, patient to some degree, at first recognized as a frontier, useful, untrustworthy as a conveyor of commerce, then only a problem confronting the builder of bridges. The problem once solved, the brown god is almost forgotten by the dwellers in cities, ever, however, implacable, keeping his seasons and rages, destroyer, reminder of what men choose to forget. Unhonoured, unpropitiated by worshippers of the machine, but waiting, watching and waiting. His rhythm was present in the nursery bedroom, in the rank ailanthus of the April dooryard, in the smell of grapes on the autumn table, and the evening circle in the winter gaslight. The river is within us. The sea is all about us. The sea is the land's edge also, the granite into which it reaches, the beaches where it tosses its hints of earlier and other creation, the starfish, the horseshoe crab, the whale's backbone. The pools where it offers to our curiosity the more delicate algae and the sea anemone. It tosses up our losses, the torn seine, the shattered lobster pot, the broken oar, and the gear of foreign dead men. The sea has many voices, many gods and many voices. The salt is on the briar rose, the fog is in the fir trees. The sea howl and the sea yelp are different voices, often together heard. The whine in the rigging, the menace and caress of wave that breaks on water, the distant rote in the granite teeth, and the wailing warning from the approaching headland are all sea voices, and the heaving groaner rounded homewards, and the seagull. And under the oppression of the silent fog, the tolling bell measures time, not our time, rung by the unhurried ground swell, a time older than the time of chronometers, older than time counted by anxious, worried women lying awake, calculating the future, trying to unweave, unwind, unravel, and piece together the past and the future between midnight and dawn, when the past is all deception, the future futureless, before the morning watch, when time stops and time is never-ending, and the ground swell that is and was from the beginning clangs the bell.
Thank you very much, Jean. I think we all saw T.S. Eliot's photograph nodding in approval at the reading of that poem. My name's Ian Macmillan. I'm your genial host for tonight, and what an evening we've got for you. 10 fantastic points, the shortlist. A bit of housekeeping first. We're not expecting a poetry alarm, but if there is a poetry alarm, trained staff will take you outside and leave you to the exit, otherwise known as the last line, the final stanza. We've got 10 points reading tonight. Each poet reading for 8 minutes. I almost said 9 minutes. I could see the poets getting excited at that, but no. 8 poetry minutes. The winners will be announced tomorrow. Tonight, we see people writing things down, placing bets on the winners. Please feel free to do that. Each shortlisted poet gets £1,500. The winner gets £25,000, which we've actually placed in the massive organ here. And when the winner's announced, the £25,000 spray from the organ. That's not true, but wouldn't it be great if it was? I think one year we should definitely do that. Our three wonderful judges are here tonight. I want to thank the T.S. Eliot Foundation for again sponsoring this. And for the first time, we've had 10 young critics from the Poetry Society's Young Poets reading each book and making very detailed criticisms of those, which are available on the website. So as ever, the T.S. Eliot Prize widens. Every year, it's a kind of comet that flies over the South Bank and lights us up in a wonderful way. So, by the way, I did actually bring along the winner. This is the £25,000. It's actually in very small poetry pound coins, which can only be spent in a poetry way. I didn't mean to do that. I actually just found that in my pocket. So, and it's not really £25,000. Let's begin the readings with the great Philip Gross. Philip told me about his journey here today, which wasn't without incident. And it struck me that's how most poets, including Philip, write their poems. He set off with great excitement on the train, and the train stopped because it was frightened of water, and it couldn't move beyond a certain point. And that's how the poet feels sometimes. You have to try and rewrite the poem. So Philip got off the train and got on a separate train, which again didn't get very far, mirroring the poet's journey through the poem. Philip tried again. The third train was like the difficult third stanza. It just stopped with steam coming out of it. Philip tried to fix it but couldn't because he's not a train driver, he's a poet. Eventually, Philip did what all poets do. He thought of something very clever. He drove here instead. He didn't want to. He'd rather come on the train, but that's what poets are. They're full of fantastic ideas, and that's what this book is, The 13th Angel. It's full of great ideas. Occasionally, you can see that Philip has thought so hard about this. He's thought hard about the third stanza, the fourth stanza. The train of the poem has broken down, but Philip's got round the corner of that. So many poems in any collection are about breath, and this one really is. Somehow, the angel of breath, as he says, pays us a visit. Breath is at the heart of so much poetry, but really the transformation of breath into language is at the beating heart as this poem, which isn't to suggest that Philip's poems are as easy as breathing, because, as I said earlier, the journey to these poems is a difficult one, but in the end, we and Philip and the audience and the poems arrive. Philip Gross.
Thank you, Ian, and welcome, everybody. What better way to start an evening of this year's cutting-edge poetry than with an old-fashioned vocative O. This is Moon, O. Moon, O true moon, if you love us, give us nothing. Blank us. Don't disclose a wink of water, not a glitter speck of ore. Nothing to raise a twinkle in the future market's eye. Chaste goddess, did you have an inkling all this time of our cracked yearnings? How we would madden ourselves, how gurn in your direction vaguely? Stay that way. A glimpse of pure negation. So not us, not ours, so unwarmed to our touch, unstirred by the least wind or whim. Don't let us think, not for a moment we can have you. Leave those toddler-suited astronauts slack-dangled in their old home movies, like marionettes in the wardrobe, a childhood we'd better forget. Leave the tangled tracks of our million-dollar toys where they crawled to a halt amidst the perfect pointlessness of you. Oh, bleachy-skinned, cool mistress, arsenic complexion, deadpan geisha, unmoved by our high romance, all the shadow puppetry we made of you. Oh, pocked and harrowed cheek, no wonder those rough sleeping nights on the sidewalk of space. Oh, never really, mistress. Tell us to sling our hook, to blast and fizzle off. Remember, we've got family at home. The last few years have been a strange upending of closeness and distance. At times, some of our nearest and dearest have been out of reach, while some kinds of the world's distance have been coming very close to home. This is a near distance. The mutterings of quiet circumstance under the threshold of attention. Now, in the stilled house, hear their breathing. Lives, almost, you share your space with. The dogged snore, like sleeping uphill of a washing machine mid-cycle. A tap upstairs, coughs on, chokes off. Attend to them. Your life and those you love hang on this patient servitude. How the wind puts its shoulder to the wheeler dealing of the wind farm with its dumb gesticulations. How precisely we can calibrate a slice of hell, turning ore to sheet metal. How well smog can conceal the barefoot scurry into sweatshops in rackety silence at first light in cities we can't put a name to. White noise, dirtied slightly, that translates as multitudes. It washes through. Forgetfulness. It's a catch in the throat of storm drains, gutters frothing, rusty outfalls in the dark, the flicker of the broadband router dreaming your life into being, the wink of it, a marker light far out in the sea lanes near dangerous shoals. So, in a collection that's really all about the world as it is now, what's with all these angels? It depends what you mean by angel. You must decide. But here I'll end with 3 of the rather more than 13 angels in this book. A glassy thing, an angel, quite see-through, exquisitely ground, like a lens. What you see is not it, but through it, world refracted, clarified. Follow it now, down the street, cut left behind the pound shop. Here it speaks in sprayed tags, up the fire escape. Here on the long concrete landing. Here gazing out at the view. Roofs, roofs. Here, magnifying the small change of a life held up to catch the gift of light, or it throws us into long perspective without warning. We grow microscopic, or it climbs inside the mirror and looks back at you. Don't try to clutch it. It might shatter, and the splinters of it cut you to the quick. Who'd have thought the debris of those unregarded lives, the words choked in their throats, Their fluent silences bricked in by noise could constitute an angel. But look at the stress lines spreading through the concrete at your feet, cracks feathering, flexing, dust flakes crumbling as it rises, the crackling sound as it fills out its wings. The first downbeat is clumsy. It gathers its mass, bundled armfuls of flight, and flings it. The horizons shudder like the tacky backdrop we half knew they were. It clears its throat like white noise, like a waterfall, like wind. The 13th angel. Not so much the uninvited at the christening as the one there are no words for in the language, not even a space in the air. Say my name, says the nothing, but day upon day rushes in. The lack seems to be filled, and yet. Try to speak, you taste it. The shock of animal intimations, something rotting in the roadside thicket, bad news, the stink that has a sweetness on its breath. Feel the weight of its humidity here inside you, like a rain cloud on the X-ray, on the conscience, in the small hours, in the margins of the soul. In 50 years, too late for you, this will all seem so clear. The 13th angel will have written the page on which you're a name, or less, a hyperlink that clicks into the mist. Today, though, it's here. It's silence like a gift for something raw, pink, crying, oh, unreasonably into being. And the 13th angel is the world itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philip. I was trying to think what this room reminded me of and the event reminded me of, and it's when, a few years ago, I presented the Northern Builders Awards at Leeds Town Hall, a similar sense of anticipation. And I thought in some ways it's very different, in some ways it's very much the same, because the builders were altering landscape, the builders were using language to decide what they wanted to do, the builders were redrafting the houses as they built them. They were actually altering the plans as they made them, and it made me think that, poetry and building are not that different. The main difference was that they said to me, at the end of everything you announce, you must say the words, simply the best. And I said, why? And they said, because when you say them, we're going to play simply the best as they come on. I said, oh. I said, surely that means they should all win, because they're all simply the best. They said, we never thought of that before. And so I'd have to say something like, yes, and the best medium-sized extension in Hull is simply the best. Then simply the best would come on. They'd have to walk on. The ones who didn't win were disappointed, which is why we're not doing that tonight, because we are all, of course, simply the best. So when I spend ages reading and rereading these books, what I do is I write all over them. I've talked about this before. I write in the books, and sometimes I tear bits out of the books and scatter them about just to see if they stand on their own. And it does work. It's just a way of loving a book, I think, to write in it and tear it up in an excitable way. And what I tend to do is find phrases and write them down, and they become the emblems of the whole book. And Victoria Aduk Bulley's book, bits of that floated towards me. Dreaming is a form of knowledge production. What a great line that is. I saw you sitting at the window of yourself. And those two lines in particular inform our reading of this book, which is, they're kind of touchstones for this book, which is, remarkable. And then for a while, you get held up by the title, Quiet. And you think, well, the book itself isn't quiet. The book is angry. The book is telling us things. The book is, in a sense, anything but quiet. It's saying, please don't be quiet. But then on page 20, there's a wonderful list of quietnesses called not quiet as in quiet, but, and I won't read them out, but there are just lists of what quiet can be. And so what Victoria's done is, what so many poets do, is find a word and just mine it for everything that could be in there, including things that we never knew were in there. Victoria Aduk Bulley.
Declaration. If sickness begins in the gut, if I live in the belly of the beast, if here at the heart of empire, if careful in the house of the host, if quiet at the hearth of the host, if here at the home of empire, if I live in the belly of the beast, let me beget sickness in its gut. Fabula 3. Towards a black mirror. Object responsibility. So, we've seen how, again, the black female body is the prototypical object against which white female subjectivity, therefore, womanhood, is defined, and how, therefore, insofar as black women are seen to exist in excess of that object responsibility, whether for appearing possessed of their own sexuality, beauty, or agency, or for directly rebelling against or naming the construction into which they have been written. In such cases, they are liable to be misread and or punished. Ontology. Western ontology as that in which there must always be opposites, its kingdom for some opposites, wherein it finds itself always on the victorious team of a series of binaries, everything from this and that, winner and loser, human and animal, being and thing, black, female, object responsibility as always to be that loser, animal, thing which makes possible, primordially births the possibility of this winner, human, being, without which, well, now what? Seeing, knowing, seeing as this is the case, knowing it to be the case as her back has carried it, seeing as the binary denies her a self, never mind a room of her own, the birth of that self depends upon, so dearly depends upon, the refusal, the rejection of the binary in order to exist in some semblance of wholeness. What might that look like? That is, in order to enter, to emerge as I. She must dance, she must two-step that move called both and. You know how it goes. Both and as body and mind. Nature and nurture, here and there. Self and other, male and female, now and then, matter and spirit, they and them, as he and her, as she and her, me and mine, and you all, as we and them and them and us, as you all, and you lot, and you man, and I and I, and I and I, and who am I anyway? A question since, unreflected as such, what might it mean to have a blackened mirror, a black mirror, since, as we know, black absorbs all light and denies its outward reflection. It is the polishedness of this black surface that gives this black mirror its mirrorness. Into this inner black mirror she looks, and she who looks back out is not fully seen, and yet she who looks back out appears fully, deep it. She appears not entirely there, but in her close but not quiteness, she is there in entirety, and all that is seen of her is not all there is. The perfect lighting, the complete image, is not most honest, for her true likeness abhors a vacuum, a white room under a harsh light. What can she say in such incarcerations, such interrogations, but nothing, as is her right. Her true likeness lives wherein she knows herself as much by what she sees of herself as what she cannot see, which, with this blackened mirror, might just about mean anything. Thus, everything, held as she is in her half-reflection, with room enough left for the possible, with scope enough for the imaginary, dark and potent as space itself. She looks, she sees, and pleased then, she says, "There now, see, here I am." Thank you.
This space is so big that you can't really call it a room, but the poets will agree that there's always such a great sense of listening and concentration in this room when the poets are reading. It's a wonderful thing to experience from the stage and I guess from the auditorium. And also, we're being live streamed to people's houses. And I try to imagine those rooms and people sitting and listening, but maybe doing other tasks as well, that they get put off by the power of the poems. I want to imagine somebody ironing who is caught up in the moment of the poems and burns a shirt, or somebody who forgets to take something out of the toaster and that burns as well. Not all these images are images of fire. I imagine somebody who forgets they're going to watch this, then they might think they might have a bath, and they start running the bath. And they're so taken by the poems that the water spreads across the house, but they don't care because they're enjoying themselves so much. So hopefully the people at home being live streamed might send us some examples of where they are. We'll flash them up later on across the organ. The other thing I often try and think about when I'm thinking about these intros is if this was a different kind of art form, how would we talk about it? And thinking about Mark Pajac's fantastic book, Slide, I think if Mark he could be a jeweller. Mark's poems really are like jewels. They gleam, they shine. You can imagine, not in any kind of facetious way, you can imagine wearing these poems. His language it's a microscope, it's a magnifying glass. For him, I think language is a means of being still for a moment, or of slowing time down and expanding space and furnishing memory. There are poems of family here, poems of love, of the natural world, but also, an almost miraculous precision of observation that does make them shine like jewels, and you think that the world is being given to you both undiluted and illuminated. I just want to quote one tiny poem called Open Water. There's an example of that. The underside of a rowboat is the shape of a church door to the world below. How many have opened for a man to fall out of a storm into that deep quiet? A 6-line poem, like a jewel, really shining like a jewel. Mark.
Reset. She chafes a flame from the lighter, listens to its gush of butane. This 13-year-old hunkered down behind the PE hut. For a full minute, she watches the raw, egg-white heat quiver round its yolk. Then she unthumbs, and the flame slims out. She tugs back her sleeve on a scar, a small pink socket in her forearm. She holds her breath and plugs in the hot lighter. Her lips clench white, eyes into walnuts, the metal cap fizzing into skin and fat, and this is how she deletes herself. Her mind's blank page, a kind of snowblindness. Then all her muscles go slack. She opens her eyes for what feels like the first time, lets out the breath taken in by someone else. This next poem is based on a little bit of family folklore. It is the unusual way that my aunt let her partner know that she was pregnant. A set place. Tonight, to show her husband she is expecting, my aunt is setting an extra place at their dinner table. On the cooker, blue flames tickle under a pot, the lid just starting to stutter, sweet smell of carrots going soft. And because ultimately the pregnancy will fail, allow her this set place to put things on hold. Here, let the clean knife hold a sliver of ceiling in its blade. Let all the dining room be trapped in the bubble of the wineglass. and let the fork hold open its little silver palm. As this wooden chair, with the plush bump of a cushion in its lap, holds no one. Brood. At 16, I did a day's work on an egg farm, a tin shed the size of a hangar. Inside its oven dark, 2,000 stacked cages, engines of clatter and squawk. My job, to shine a torch through the bars for the dead hens and pack them tight into a bin bag. All the time, my mind chanting, there's only one hen. Just one ruined hen repeated over and over. In this way, I soothed the sight of all that caged battery, their feathers stripped to stems, their patches of scrotum skin, their bodies held in the dead hands of their wings. But what kept me awake that hot night in my box room, as I listened to the brook outside chew on its stones and the fox's human scream, was how those thousand birds had watched me. And really, it was me, repeated over and over, set in the amber of their eyes. Me, the frightened boy in jeans stiff with chicken shit, carrying a bin bag full of small movement. A foot that opened, an eyelid that unshelled its blind nut, a beak mouthing a word. I am available for children's parties, by the way, just throwing it out there. This last poem, growing up, me and my best friend Joe got very drunk, found a bridge, we hung off that bridge, and we dared each other to let go. And this is that story. After closing time, for Joe. We head to the edge of town, to the Black River and Old Stone Bridge. Two boys full of vodka, tipping side to side like flames. And for a laugh, we climb the railing and hang from our arms. Below, in the deep, two boys peer up at us over their feet. Like drops of water, we are gathering ourselves to fall. One of us says, "You go first." And we echo this back and forth. We are here for a very long time. Years, in fact. I marry, divorce, you skip all that, become a father. We see less and less of each other. Now we are what the world considers men, which is to say, we've learned that falling is inevitable. Yet here we are still, side by side, two boys, way past closing time, holding on until the other lets go.
So many of our poets tonight are writing about time, aren't they, in all its different ways. And Denise Saul's wonderful book, The Room Between Us, when I read that, it was as though parts of the book stayed with me like earworms. You know, you'll read the book, you'll put it down, you'll read another book, and the other book that you're reading will somehow appear to have some of Denise's lines in it. So somehow, in some strange time warp, those lines have landed with you. Denise's book is about caring, it's about illness, it's about the simple is the wrong word, the simple humanity that we have to show to each other if we are going to live together in this world. And like I said before, I look through the books and I try and find something that if I had a T.S. Eliot Award tea towel range, I would have printed on the tea towels as a kind of marketing play. I've suggested that for many years. It's never been taken up. But there's a little 3 lines here. My mother's ring has no beginning and no end. I donated it to a charity shop. A month later, a friend returned the ring in a recycled box. And isn't that what, in general, poetry does? You donate it somewhere, it comes back slightly different. That's the exciting thing about poetry, that every one of us in this room will have a different view of each word, of each line, and that's the glory of this book, I think. It keeps coming back to you in a different way. It really does. Earworms, proper earworms in this book. Denise Saul.
The room between us. There you are, beside the telephone stand, waiting for me in a darkened room when I force open the white door. There you lie, behind it. I never found out why you grabbed a pewter angel instead of the receiver when you tried to call me that morning. I give up trying to lift you from the floor, as the room is no longer between us. You point again to the Bible door wall before I whisper, "It's all right. Now tell me what happened before the fall." After a stroke, my mother experienced aphasia, which is a speech disability caused by damage to the speech centres of the brain. And from that, she learnt to communicate with her left hand. Minor variations. She squeezed my wrist, which meant I must carry on talking. There are 2 major hand gestures and 3 combined signs. I use 2 minor variations to tell her that I understand. The same fingers that confer a blessing can point to a window. No 2 hands are alike. The left hand holds the affected right arm. What she leaves out describing are the days of the week. She points too much, but no one has told her to stop. At the beginning of the pandemic, I received a phone call about my brother's condition. Golden Grove, in memory of Aubrey. Unbearable as night from which sleep comes, you are everywhere at once, in the wind, on sunken earth, in stilling water. I carry your heavy urn to Golden Grove, where tamarind trees emerge as woods. The dream holds back day from night, and you, a wanderer, could not wait to leave rain behind in our city. You will now become 1,000 things: scent of jasmine, salted air, troubling light. And this is the last poem. A woman travels in search of sound. On the move again, this time to Surrey, but I couldn't take with me all the plants my family left behind. The row of simple petunias made their last appearance this summer. All the plants, I hear them, and the quieter they are, the more I hear them. The breaking sound of twigs comes to me as I clear away leaves under bushes. A helicopter overhead circles the house. Its presence breaks the many silences of grass. I hear all the registers of flowers. Newton was not the first to make a connection with the ways of green. It's part yellow and part blue. Here, the petunias follow mother's ordering of size rather than of importance. Even with the final walk from the side gate to the removal van, I hear the unequal division of sound between the tread on a concrete path and quiet water pooling beneath the gutter.
Thank you very much, Denise. The power of tonight's readings is wonderful, I think you'll agree. We've had a message from somebody watching the live stream, a man who's been knitting a scarf, and he was so taken by the readings, he started knitting very, very quickly. And the scarf is now 18 miles long, which just shows the power of poetry, doesn't it? It can do anything. We've got one more reading, then it's the interval. In the interval, the bookstall will be open, and then at the end of the evening, the poets will be very keen to sign their books. So please stick around for that. Our last reader before the interval is the wonderful Yomi Sode, and this astonishing book, Mannerism, it just asks such profound and resonant questions. Who are we? How shall we live? Maybe more importantly, how shall we live with each other? How can boys live? How can we teach boys how to live with themselves and with other people? And it asks us, how shall we read poems? And who are these poems for? And when I say it like that, it suggests that the book would be almost too weighty to lift, because it's full of such profundity, but it isn't. You know, the opposite is the case. When I read these poems, there is so much in them, but they are like beautiful bird song. They're light. They're lighter than air. They really are. They fly. They fly around you, and they inform you as they fly around you about the really profound questions that they're asking. It's a kind of miracle that only poetry can do, I think. Yomi Sode.
Big in there, innit? This is an invitation to everybody in this room just to join in the process and in the spirit of these poems. Talo Mujegbe, who gets away with it? Who is painted as a First and foremost, a genius seldom. And who gets the pardon? Mannerism. 15-year-old Alex Mann gets pulled from the crowd onto the Glastonbury stage wearing a Thiago Silva shirt, bucket hat, pattern shorts, and a Fila bum bag. The nation watched on in anticipation as Alex accepts Dave's invitation to rap AJ Tracy's verse in his silence. Alex Mann, white, gun-fingered, and confused with excitement, says he's fucking buzzing live on TV. I watch as Dave carefully mentors him through this process of cool, and because Britain loves an underdog, the crowd, as in everybody in this room, begins to chant loudly, Alex, Alex, oh, Thiago Silva, go. Louder, oh, Thiago, to the roof, one more time. Cheving on their own as the beat drops and it shoots out the gate. Let's fucking go. The crowd goes wild for Alex Mann. 3 days on and my thumb is two-stepping the remote control, flicking between Alex from Glasgow, the now viral sensation, and AJ Tracy. Both of them are being interviewed at the same time on separate channels. Alex, you slayed Glastonbury. I salute you. You took your chance. AJ, some of your other videos is almost like a bit of a shout out to gangs in London. AJ's body shifts in discomfort. A mannerism not shared by Alex from Glasgow, whose IG followers have leapt from 90 to 196,000. I watch as Champagne Popper, 44 Chopper and a Black Nat Bomber is cheered on. Its violent undertones deemed suitable for breakfast television. I hear the praise lavished for Alex. I switch and hear the bait questions asked of AJ. Role model, switch. Gangs, switch. Inspiration, switch. Twerking, switch. Alex Mann is celebrated, reaping the rewards of words that were never his, and a culture appropriated over time while the mouth from which the lyrics were born is sealed and unpraised. The artist consistently reminded of the circumstances he grew up in which he has since outgrown. David Starkey commented, you know, a bloody lot of them survived. The same way, what color will the baby be? Or, no. Where are you really from? Will be seen as a reasonable question to ask. And I wonder how we do it. How it's all tucked in, a Diane Abbott type of superpower. December 4th. For Big Mummy, for my family, and for anyone that's dealing with grief in one way, shape, or form. This month marks 4 years since we laid her to rest. It was 7 a.m. when I was handed the phone. Mum was on the line. She sounded tired. Hey, darling. There was a pause in what's to follow. The room was pitch black. My son wishes me happy birthday while she is drowning, and I'm nowhere in sight to save her. Just say it already. Just tell me. Let's just get this over and done with. She's gone. I held my phone away. My son asked why Daddy is crying. I couldn't lie, so I ignored him. He had to go to school in 2 hours. My head was turned the same way it was with you that day in the chapel. I wiped, I sniffed, I turned to him. Daddy's okay. I checked my phone. I saw the missed calls from you earlier in the morning telling me that she's gone. And again, I wasn't there when you needed me the most. I pictured you sat next to Big Mummy all alone, and I was sorry. I was so sorry. My final poem is dedicated to my son. It's dedicated to the man them in the space. It's dedicated to all the boys, all the black boys I've worked with since I was 16 years old. For black boys, you idolize Mr. Marcus more than their fathers. Black boys who watched Mr. Marcus having sex in his birthday suit, wearing Timbs and a baseball cap, iconic. Black boys who understood intimacy through VHS tapes, DVDs, LimeWire, and word of mouth. Black boys with questions regarding their bodies. What do I do when my heart beats fast and blood rushes to my penis? Black boys never voicing their queries. Black boys with questions about masturbation, making themselves a bad taste in mandem's mouth, something rancid, something other than a boy that's ready. Boys, not men. Boys, not Mr. Marcus, whose physique speaks before his mouth opens. Mr. Marcus, who when he edges, tightens his arse until he arrives. A rites of passage met through time, that shedding, that low, slow grunt of mourning, an exhale as deep as Mr. Marcus's. Black boys fast-tracked into manhood, hands on the steering wheel, foot on the acceleration with instructions to keep on straight. Their heads barely reaching over the dashboard, the world looking on as they crash into everything in sight. Police, teachers, parents, lovers. Black boys who held confessions like unguarded candles to their flammable bodies. Black boys who idolized Mr. Marcus, a porn star who raised a generation more than some fathers did, who was there at a button's click, could be paused at night and still be found there in the morning, who was present, gathering dust as we aged, as we watched him. Under this moon's gaze, we watched him, this shooting star. Black boys who took notes when clinics felt too awkward to go into for advice, when sex education in schools did not do enough to educate on sex. Black boys who nervously laughed when putting condoms on bananas. Black boys misguided. Black boys taking matters into their own hands. Black boys chirping on road or after a rave. Black boys boasting they beat, they fucked, they banged. They never spoke about kissing, about touching, about hugging. Foreplay. Black boys that never talked, never knew how to deal with broken hearts. Black boys bawling sadness, angst into rage and rejection. Black boys violent. Black boys frightened. Black boys never sharing fears about sex, about loss, about whether they were ready. Oh, black boys, the world assumes that you were ready. Oh, black boys, how fucked up it is to think that your idolization of Mr. Marcus, the absence of some fathers, these ways of living, that all of this was normal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yomi. There'll now be a short-ish interval. We'll tell you when to come back, and we'll have some more wonderful readings. But let's have one more round of applause for our 5 readers so far. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Time to start the second half. People who follow me on Twitter will know that this morning I couldn't decide which of two shirts to wear for presenting tonight. I said I'll bring them both down and decide in the moment. And that's what I've done. So in the first half, I wore my blue shirt. The second half, I got this shirt. And it's like a northern club turn who wears a different shirt in the second half. I've also brought 10 pairs of socks. You won't have seen because the light's been off. I've been changing my socks between each point in a way of redrafting my actual self. How about that? Our first point in the second half is a fantastic Zaffar Kunial, Hebden Bridge's finest. And I always think that all poets, as we've seen so far, examine language. But Zaffar really examines language. He's a kind of word surgeon. He really examines them. He takes words apart. He reconstructs them to see what makes them work and what might make them work if he altered them a little bit. He says in a haiku series, in the beginning, the middle was the spark, or was the words Big Bang. And somehow each word is the result of a Big Bang. And each time Zaffar writes a word, he reinvents it. There's a wonderful sequence in here called ings, where he looks at that word ing, that part of a word ing, that fragment of a word ing, and he makes it his own in a remarkable way. So we're now going to have some Zaffar Kunial ing for the next 8 minutes. Zaffar.
England. History is now, and England. T.S. Eliot, Little Gidding. We all have lives that go on without us. I've a cricket me who didn't stop, like that was that, when my bat had felt as heavy as England, and I took no wickets while the coach stood in my net in the second and final trial for Warwickshire. A bear and staff on my jumper, perhaps later. But those butterflies, it thundered outside on that second day. Life stops and forks where another follows on. England's Moeen Ali went to my school. His dad's from Didial. Mine's up in the village over the bridge. I don't know if he knows what I do now. Dad, I mean. We all have lives that go on without us, unwritten. I have history on grounds I've not played on. Grace Road, the Oval, Eden Gardens. We all have lives that go on without us. It matters where the line breaks. I knew I should pursue this future that was always behind me, at the wood's edge, a realm between weathers, where losses and times fold at the crease, clueless as to what it was or for whom. I read that poem for my father, who was buried a month ago to this day in Kashmir. And the poem is linked with Foxglove Country, which is the next poem I'm going to read. And it's linked, I suppose, by the gloss sound in Foxglove and in the middle of England. And I used to stutter a bit when I was young, and though I wasn't thinking of that when I wrote this poem, I'm often surprised by the way small sounds can snag on buried emotions and times and countries. Foxglove Country. Sometimes I like to hide in the word foxgloves, in the middle of foxgloves. The ex-gla is hard to say out of the England of its harbouring word. Alone it becomes a small tangle, a witch's thimble, hard to toll bell, elvish door to a door. Ex-gla, a place with a locked beginning, then a snag, a gluh, like the little Englands of my grief, a knotted dark that locks light in glisten, glow, glint, gleam, and Oberon's banks of eglantine, which closes in on the opening of Gulliver, whose shrunken gull says rose in my fatherland. Meanwhile, in the motherland, the ex-g is almost the thumb of a lost mitten, an impossible interior, deeper than forests and further in, and deeper inland is the gulp, the gulf, the gap, the grip that goes before love. Thank you. Thank you. So my book's called England's Green, and the green of England's Green is a complicated shade that hides and holds the green of Pakistan and of Ireland, and the green fringes of a city and a playing field, perhaps, and what's beginning and what's old. And the England is sometimes an inner land, and the E at the start of England sometimes becomes an I and an in. And small sounds like in and o are very important to the book and go through it like a butterfly. The next poem is called O, and that's just an O on its own, but it has an apostrophe next to it, as in O'Donnell, which turned out to be an ancestral name. My Scottish great-grandfather ran a small pub, and apparently he would go on stage and do magic tricks. So you have to imagine an O hanging over this poem with its apostrophe. O. Are you watching closely? My great-grandfather, Hugh MacDonald, was a magician and a tap dancer. Magic Mac's father, Neil, was an O'Donnell who magicked his Donegal surname Scottish after floating to Aberdeen, where he married a Julia Finn, and there Hugh would in time run an inn, wherein he did his tricks. It is important to remember Magic Mac's mother was called Julia, as was her mother, and you can forget for now that her brother was a watchmaker who lived one time in Dublin. Now this second Julia, the elder Julia, had a granddaughter called Julia Finn MacDonald, whose daughter was called Julia, who was English and was, or would be, my mother. Here now is a coin Magic Mac pulled, not from his coat pocket, but the small English ear of my eventual mother. Look, it has two heads. Here is my face. Here is his. Ignore the three small round cups over there and the floating O in window or coat or poetry. Forget the world shades coming through. Keep your eyes on this one coin. Are you watching closely? Are you watching closely? Thank you, you're very kind. I'm going to end with a poem called The Wind in the Willows, which is the last poem in the book. And my father used to tell a story of how he learnt to read this English script, and he'd say that he'd look at shop signs and look up and see the letters and see what the shop sold and try to match the shapes with the sounds. And I think that way of looking at language has stayed with me a bit. But it's the title, The Wind in the Willows, that I was thinking of here, and perhaps the willow tree and beginnings, and perhaps also the idea of poetry. The Wind in the Willows. Unread, the book was all shades of distance, but I knew the title, and the title stuck. Mossy cover, hazed interior, the species too. I'd say, if asked, it was my favourite kind of tree, though it was never with one certain tree in mind. There was a garden, I vaguely remember, the way the leaves curtained like shadows, a lit cave, a fringe, not yours, you could look through. And the wood that grew by flowing water carved cricket bats, which was a part of the little I also knew. Maybe it was all a little to do with letters too, the tongueless trees of that printed double L, or the uncrowing tall W's of the wind in the willows. Maybe it was all oral and echoed in, wind in. Maybe the open-mouthed, billowy lows, maybe the leaf-fringed mystery between the two. And speaking of poetry, I had this initiating thought. In the flax-smelling grain of the first bat I was gifted, wind was contained, old power locked, a gravity well beyond mine, light enough slight arms could lift it, wind in willow, this percussive wood, a gathered strength, a mutual bind. Though I was far from writing, or this book, that sense, I suppose, in spirit was poetry, and early. The very last thing poetry is a poem. Thank you.
All the poets tonight will be featured on my show The Verb on Radio 3 this coming Friday, also available on BBC Sounds for a month after, so have a listen to that and listen to the poems again in tranquility, as it were. We've heard from the man who's knitted that scarf. He contacted us in the interval. It's now 18 miles long, and he's going to bring it before the end of the show. He only lives round on Coin Street, so he's going to bring it round, him and his family, and we're going to wrap ourselves in it in a kind of poetry moment. So I'm looking forward to that. Just at the end, he's going to come in. That'll be great. I think you'll agree. Gemma Borg's book is, I keep using the word remarkable, and this is another remarkable book. It's called Wilder, and the epigraph at the start of the book tells us Wilder is an obsolete verb, to lose one's way or bewilder. And in a sense, that's what the book does. It loses its way, and then it finds it. And the book is about the world that we live in, the natural world, our response to the natural world. Like so many of the poems tonight, it's about how we must live with each other. And like I did before, I look through, I try and find phrases that will stay with me, that'll help me in these introductions. In the first poem in the book, Marsh Thistle. Nothing sweet, but every part of it a soul, so that somehow every part of it being the poem, it being us as listeners, it being the poet, every part of it a soul. All the wounded and wounding glory of enduring. What a wonderful phrase that is about what we are as people, the wounded and wounding, but the glory of enduring. A striking image in a poem about an ultrasound scan. Here is where we begin and end. Here is the city where we live. The penthouse and public house, warehouse and slaughterhouse, merry-go-round and holy ground of the heart. And holy ground of the heart is one of those phrases that just rings like a bell. It's wonderful. Gemma can't be with us tonight, but her friend and the fantastic poet Meryl Pugh is going to read the poems for us. Meryl.
Good evening, and thank you to our interpreters. Peacock butterfly, late. Late autumn, And the butterfly under the black oaks is busy and overdue. Hurry, hurry, the nettles already sleep, the ferns are bronzed and stiff, the amanita's torch-red caps have surfaced among the roots of the pines. Necessity sets her to her task, and well might we ask, what kind of fragility will be lost first? The slow attention that breeds gentleness, or the butterfly's strong, frail pulse? See the articulate lightness and little more than the weight of a dance, the soundless doors of her wings breathing. And, closed, the archaic soft body inhales again, and, opened, her owl eyes startle with their exquisite deception. And these two states, opening and closing, hinged one on the other, flicker in thesis and antithesis. An old film fluttering on its reel. So next, I'm going to read an excerpt from Gemma's long poem, San Pedro and the Bee. San Pedro is a cactus which is used to make a traditional psychedelic medicine that is considered to treat the heart specifically. 6. Cactus Bee. Hours pass at the navel of the world. You get up and walk as though you'd stepped onto land after weeks on a ship, and soberly find your body drunk at its root. The healing is in the detail. An Echinopsis parkinoi living in a pot on the patio of a house near Pajac in the Sacred Valley, in the Andes, in the south of Peru, sits you down heavily and talks to you, out of the entire cosmos of its speckled skin, riffing on the theme of bee. It says its spines, darkened at their tips as long as fingers, are the stingers of bees, and the plump buds from which the spines grow, and spines are a kind of leaf, are the bodies of bees, heads buried in the cactus flesh, bottoms sticking out. Who knew evolution could rhyme cactus with bee? Then you too are covered in spines, and all the unseen wires of your body align and bristle. The venom is a nectar, and you shiver with 1,000 bee stings. Your head unfolds the huge white flowers of San Pedro. There is something in the wounding that is a birth, like the sun god's tears that turned into bees, like the dying bee that laid its egg in a mantis, and the egg hatched into the first human. Even in a lineage of grief, life blooms. So Gemma writes, in another of my poems, grief is a kind of rooting. It can't be kept exact like a stone. It wilders, it sprouts. And this is where I am tonight, in the process that grief demands. I have found, speaking from this dark place, that what stands opposite grief is not what we expect it might be, joy, happiness, but praise. This last poem is concerned with both possible meanings of its title, wilder and wilder, and so, like the book title itself, could legitimately be either. And there's an epigraph to this poem from Mary Midgley. It reads, Love, like compassion, is not a rare fluid to be economized, but a capacity which grows by use. So this is the last poem. Wilder. Before you found the words of praise, or perhaps it was after, drunk to your toes, sloshed, wasted, Brahms and Liszt, as you swayed on bridges over black rivers, or caressed your skin with a knife to feel the tender script it writes. As you walked in the valley of fear, where the air thins to choking, you'd told yourself, get lost in the woods, be wilder, and left those in their cages to their sober pacing, to their abomination of soft drinks. And here you are, off the path, drunk until you truly do love everyone, as you've always loved everything that wasn't human. And you're laughing, as that's the gift and the ruse. A contented little Buddha who has long contemplated falling leaves, the sky laying shades of blue on the face of a tranquil lake. There's no tomorrow, no after. Did you remember how to surface? Only now, where you plunge into a cold sea at midnight, the wreck of the moon clear-headed as rain, the water biting any hard heart it meets. Though it would be easy to shift only a little, to not be born. Be drunk instead, head to toes, vibrant in the wave, then boulder to shore, heavy as a tree, landfalling onto sand, and the curved world catches you like a word lost. Then the word is one. Thank you.
I think one of the many exciting things about the poems tonight, and in fact in poetry in general at the moment, is that there's a lot of prose in the books, and not the traditional prose poem, as it were, but it seems to me that poets are taking over that territory that has been written by prose writers, and it's so great to see poets energising prose. It's a wonderful thing. You can't always hear it in the readings, but it's there on the page. In the World Cup, it was just on, you often think they have those things like those octopuses that will decide who's going to win the World Cup by sticking their tentacles out the water, or sometimes a kangaroo will decide who's going to win the World Cup by the way they jump. And the other day I had all the books, all the shortlist books scattered around the back room, and my new grandson Louis came. He's 6 months old and he was sat in his high chair and he's just learning to eat with his spoon, a bit like me, and he was spraying stuff out with a spoon. I thought, whichever book the most stuff lands on will win tonight. And I wasn't going to tell you the winner, but in fact the one that most stuff landed on was actually Postman Pat. He was there, so he's going to be the winner tonight. I'd love to read a book of poems by Postman Pat, by the way. They'd be great. Be kind of confessional, wouldn't they? Him and Mrs. Goggins. Wouldn't that be a thing? All of us who read poems and write poems will know that fools, we can only call them that, will sometimes come up behind you, whisper and go, look, poetry. It's got nothing to do with real life, has it? It's about poetry. It's not about real life. And that poems are just kind of decorative. They're just kind of epaulets, or they're like cravats on real life. And in fact, what I do with those fools is just show them this book, Bandit Country, by James Connor Patterson, which actually glows with real life, which is rendered in the most exquisite poetry that refuses, in a wonderful way, to accept that standard English, whatever that is the only dance in the dance hall. This book stares hard at recent history until it resolves itself maybe into stanzas and moments of exquisite linguistic beauty that all the time glows with life. Fantastic language all the way through this book. James Connor Patterson.
Thank you, Ian. That's James Connor Patterson, by the way, not James Patterson, in case people thought they were coming to see The Crime Writer. Sorry to disappoint. It's no secret that Ciaran Carson was a huge influence on my development as a writer and acted as a mentor not only to me but to many other Irish poets producing work today. And so it feels fated in some small way that I should be up here reading exactly 30 years since Ciaran won the inaugural T.S. Eliot Prize in 1993 and set the standard for so many of us who came after him. So in that spirit, I'm going to begin with a poem dedicated to Ciaran Carson. It's called Prosthetics. Granted, old Jim was a bit of a space cadet, and granted, that at the end he became so demented, the cops picked him up at 2 a.m, huddled freezing beneath a blackthorn bush. But for a while there, the neighbourhood had a character, someone who'd perch in his paint-covered kitchen chair overlooking the resi and invite you up to the garage for a miller. He'd call you over in your Christian Brothers uniform, for all the world looking like a man still in his prime. There was nothing sinister in this. Jim was older than the Queen and would sometimes refer to his own wife as Hitler. In fact, during the war, he lost a leg after one of his own squashed it with a tank. 2 weeks in a field hospital in El Alamein before the leg was chopped, and he was sent back home to live a good-natured life, showing lads like me the prosthetic which he would tap with a shillelagh. Jim was my first Protestant friend, though I never managed to make it to the funeral. What puts me in mind of him is a poem written by another friend about a man he knew called Horse Boyle. Horse flew missions over Dresden during the war and had finished out his days making a kind of prosthetic of the caravan he lived in out beyond Carrick. By prosthetic, of course, I mean an extension of himself, which all homes are, and which in this case is described by my friend as being encroached upon by baroque pyramids of empty baked bean tins, rusts, and ochres. This, in turn, puts me in mind of my own phantom limb and whether I'd be expected to extol the virtues of friends and family, none of them, after all, cohering to an idea of oneself as an extension, and even if they did, are somewhat diminished by the suggestion that they are. Prosthetics require something to have been lost in the first place, and since my life has essentially been one long, steady process of accumulation up to now, each loss found becomes something else entirely, which is another way of saying that unexpected loss leads to unexpected gain, which is another way of saying, Mohara, that of the gains you've given me, I now give back to you in the form of an outstretched imitation of the original. As you can tell, I'm in a sentimental kind of mood tonight. I hope that doesn't detract from the selection of poems here, most of which are about people very dear to me. The second of those poems is about my granny. It's called On Returning from the Hospital, My Granny adjusted the horn of her hearing aid so that the frequency shifted, then screeched, then silence descended through an open window, as though birds had landed or flowers settled in the sill. Fair City prattled on mute in the background. A distant kettle popped in the larder, and What was it you wanted to ask me, bandied between us for several moments, though I could think of nothing? An inquiry into the new priest, perhaps, or an anecdote about her da's time at Ypres, whereupon, settling herself into the wing-back seat that was my granda's, she gave an account of what it was like to fly. All right. Gotta find my place here. Postscript. That we could walk hand in hand down a road that neither takes us home nor ends, nor makes us tired to continue. That the significance of it, I mean to say, hits me freshly each time it dissipates, like breath freed from a pride sarcophagus, or the slipped refrain of an air caught in a bar, or on a bus, or in a bookshop behind the stacks of YA and SF, is a possibility which leaves me both terrified and elated, replacing face after face until everyone's face is yours. London poem, in which we bully home into coherence, in which rooms distend with pizza boxes, HDMI cables, glasses of Pinot Grigio, and libraries of unreturned library books, in which measures of expatriation becomes a handbook for negotiating the tube. Language is my home alive other than in speech, in which articulation moves through the ingredients culled from our shopping list: garlic, chocolate, regular white bread, in which nourishment is spread mouth to mouth, skin to skin, and our salt rebuff to England has less to do with speech and more the small republic sprawled across our mattress. And I'll leave you with a poem which isn't so sentimental. This is based on a story, or rather an urban legend, told to me by my granda about a quarry in my hometown of Newry, where I grew up, where during his childhood people used to swim, and the local urban legend or the rumor or whatever you want to call it was that this swim hole was bottomless, and so this poem imagines what that actually would have been like if it was bottomless. It's called The Drowning. The story then became like this. He jumped in off a Clydesdale horse, then vanished like Eurydice beneath the sawdust, oil and gorse. His friends went looking for him there, sun-scorched in their wool knit pants, beneath the rusted excavator, up from High Street and the manse. They brought corned beef and bits of soda, wrapped up in a greaseproof square. They took some chocolate from the soldiers, some Darcy's kept in earthenware, and checked the crushers filled with ashlar, the Morris tipper and the track. Decided they would jump in also when they failed to bring him back. And so the parents brought their hammers, bits of sheathing, casing nails, and built a mast from railway sleepers, darning suntans for their sails, and built a boat to cross the quarry, diving where their kids went in, and followed them into the hollow, which locals said had no bottom. And so the mayor dived for the parents, worried for his yearly vote, and so the council braved the currents for their leader's anecdote, and then the doctors and the soldiers, followed by the entire town, until at last they filled the swim hole and all of us were underground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James Connor Patterson. For many years now, decades, I've been poet in residence at Barnsley Football Club, and way back in the late 90s, We beat Man United 3-2 in a cup match, and this man turned to me and said, "You'll not write a poem about this, you'll write a sonnet." I said, "Yes." And it seems to me that the sonnet is one of the most durable of forms, and it is having a moment at the moment. And one of the poets who is making the sonnet really dance to a new tune is the brilliant Anthony Joseph in this moving and powerful collection, In Search of an Elusive, even when he's very present, Father. In the same way that when I go to the barber's and I get my hair cut and the barber shows you the back of your neck in a mirror, I see the back of my dad's neck. And it's that kind of thing where somehow a father is present and not present at the same time, even when he's in the room with you. And that's what Anthony's amazing book does. It's about his father, it's about him, it's about manhood, it's about how we relate to each other as men and as people in the world. And always within it, the sonnet, this most malleable of forms, shows that it can be invented and reinvented and reinvented. And as Anthony says, I only have to look at my hands to see my father. So somehow the father is there as well, writing the sonnets alongside him. Anthony Joseph.
Okay, thank you, Ian. This is a book of sonnets about my father, but my mother does get into the book. She makes 2 appearances. My mother and father got together when they were really young. My mom was 18, I think my dad was about 20. The relationship didn't last. I have one memory of them together and one photograph, and this is the memory I have of them. Jogi Road. From life, from love, in shame. The red sawmill on Jogi Road with cedar grain in its fibrous air, red. The old train track and the bridge where my mother's rage was bruising the dark. Her fingernails ripped at my father's shirt, his face. This is blood. The way he looks away, then down with open palms in resignation. But memory has a curious sting. The red sawmill was not on Jogi Road, but on Silver Mill. And in the savannah, there were 5 salmon trees which cried when cut, not 6. My father held me over his shoulder that night. No, I was looking up from the road. What do I know of my father's body? Not even a bottle of duty-free rum or a carton of the Morier. This time I come with both hands swinging. Arriving first at the funeral home where you are already waiting in your pillow box, exuding a kind of warmth. You are my father's body, but I know so little of you. I know the soft weight of your hands on my shoulder at the airport. I know your rings. And I felt the muscle of your panic wrist once, when we were far out at Maracas and the ocean almost overcame us. I have seen your gut grow into its own sonnet, and your head grow gleaming and bald. But today, it is your chest I come to know. How rigid it is when I press upon the crisp sheen of your burial shirt, to tread a rose through the eye of your lapel, and I find the pall-bearing weight of your life when we grip the casket's chrome to lift and carry you down to the hearse waiting in the bright yard. Precipice. They sent me that dusk to find my father in the gambling rooms near the precipice in the quarry. There below was eternity and rockstone debt, and perched on the edge was the wooden veranda where rough men threw cards, where dice were rolled, and the earth was slippery with piss. I looked for my father among their faces, but it was so long since I had seen him that the looking was tough and wore me down. So I walked out on First Avenue with red dirt on my feet. And suddenly there was such brightness in the sky, which was not the sun, but the sky lid opening to burst with celestial light. And I looked right into it, and I knew then what death would feel like, falling, the sharp and deadly stone waiting beneath. So this is a poem called POSGH1. The acronym POSGH stands for Port of Spain General Hospital. And this is an old colonial hospital that is in the center of Port of Spain. And it's a place where a lot of Trinidadians go to be born and to die. POSGH1. Having caught his first heart attack, the big man gives me hope to hold, says he feels good enough to leave. He flirts with the nurses. He is in hospital on Charlotte Street, the hospital that always smells of burnt milk and disinfectant, the same hospital of first consciousness, where I visited my grandfather after his blackout and sickness in 1977, after stopping with my grandmother on Gordon Street corner to buy the old Bull peanut punch and Mopsy biscuit. The hospital of windows from where I watched blue smoke rise from the morgue and turned away from my mother's bed to catch my evening flight. 2 days later, she blinked hard into cancerous death. That same ex-colonial hospital by Memorial Park, where my father once lifted me onto his shoulders so I could see the carnival pass. And I'm finishing with a poem. It's called Tina. So Tina was my sister, and Tina was not my father's daughter, but they had a very close relationship. For some reason. And the only thing else I have to tell you about this poem is that in Trinidad we use the word quite sometimes to signify distance. So when I say quite, it means a long distance away, all right? It's not a mistake. Tina, hear this one. The big man surveyed a house. He said, okay, all you will have to break down to build back that kitchen. While they're building, them pillars could support the bedroom. You and your daughter could stay in there. The living room need new flooring. T&Tech not connecting electric until you fix that roof. The wiring faulty. Fire. You're talking good money. Materials, cement, labor. But Tina, you can't live like this with termite in ruins. He had left quite Santa Cruz to go to Five Rivers to see what could be done for Tina and Trish. Tina, not Albert daughter, but Baptist, no Baptist. And she have his last name. She dies 2 years after he does. Serpent didn't possess her womb, was stomach cancer. And 2 weeks after, the house she suffered to save fell down. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I've got a friend also called Ian. He's a painter, an artist, and we often go around galleries together. And it's always interesting going around galleries with artists when you yourself are not an artist, Because he'll look at two paintings that to me look very similar, and he'll go, to one, that's rubbish. And the other one he'll go, that's great. And you'll think, I wonder what critical faculties I'm missing there. But his other phrase that he uses a lot is, if he doesn't like a painting, he'll go, video game. If he likes it, he'll go, could never make a video game. And what he means by that is that some of the best kinds of art, of whatever kind, couldn't be anything else. Sometimes you'll read a poem, you'll think, well, that could almost be it. You could make a video game out of that. You could make a story out of it, a novel, a film. And what I've always loved about Fiona Benson's poems is they can only ever be poems. They're poems. They kind of justify the word poem. They can't be symphonies or photographs. They are simply poems. They seem to fit the word poem perfectly. So in this collection, there are poems about insects like the mayfly, her body's empty purse. There's poems about, well, it says it's hotel of spitballed papier-mâché, which is the wasp. What a wonderful description of the wasp. There are vivid pieces about a boarding school experience, versions of myths, and a really powerful sequence of poems about daughterhood and motherhood, achingly tender, and all the moods in the book, a kind of kaleidoscope of moods, could never be anything else but poems, and that's a rare and a beautiful thing, I think. Fiona Benson.
It's a long walk. I'm so very, very grateful to be here with you tonight. I'm going to read 3 nocturnes. Big Dipper Fireflies for Maya Bosworth. Silently at dusk, the big dippers rising from the grass, green and upward cinders, gentle, wandering stars. And we two on our knees, cupping them up, holding them close, like something we lost at the edge of the forest and loved. How we are enthralled as the soft green flush in the lamp we make of our hands comes and goes. How we peer into the improvised chambers we make with our fingers to see them housed, their beetle wings striped like sunflower seeds, and the tender segments of their bellies glimmering like tree sap breathing, an emerald electric pulse. And though we've been disenchanted, strangers to ourselves, in multiple prisons, unleaved, unskied, I've been ready to lie down, dearest dust, I have wanted to die. Once more, in wonder, the raw green girl who lives in me still trembles, ignites, and we open our hands like books, let them fly. The next poem is Ariadne's story of what happened to her brother Asterios, who is also known, of course, as the Minotaur. Ariadne on Asterios' imprisonment in the labyrinth. Most people couldn't understand him. You had to listen. He had a way of speaking. Some sounds, some signs. Give, please, help. And usually about our mother, mine. Ma was mother, obviously. He called me Nee. He'd tilt his head if he wanted to be petted, could sway it for no and nod for yes. Sometimes he was rough, but I could manage him. The trick was to kick him behind the knees and he'd fold like a pile of blocks. We had a sign for sorry. You patted your chest. Sometimes I find myself patting there still, that blighted, sorry place, as I apologize to him, lost in that faraway, forgetting zone. After his imprisonment, I'd lead him out at night. Daedalus showed me the way, the concealed door, the lock, the thread. At first, my brother would run like mad ahead of me along the path, head down, making his noise for happy, tacking back and forth. Often we went to the beach and swam in the dark, the water firing all round us with tiny phosphorescent sparks. He'd spout the water out of his mouth like a joyous black-furred dolphin. When he was tired, he'd lie on the damp sand and watch the extravagant sky, a little noise for each slit star, the Milky Way reflected in his eyes. For months it was enough, but we are grandchildren of the sun. It sickens us not to feel its blaze. After a while, I could barely coax him out at night, and when we sat, all he would do was rest his head against his knees and slump and rock. Then he became so thin he could barely walk. I'd lead him tottering out, and he'd sink to the ground, too weak to make the beach. He stank of piss. I was afraid, but couldn't think of how to get him free. I made excuses to visit less and was ashamed. One night, he turned his face to me and tilted so I'd stroke his cheek and signed the words slowly, clearly. I heard them plain as if he'd placed them singly in my brain. Want, die. And then he made the sign for help. Brother, look at me now. I'm signing sorry. It took me months to say yes. It took me years to find a way. And by the time he came with his swagger and deceit, looking under his eyelashes at our sister Phaedra, you'd lost all speech. You were eating your own feces. You didn't know me. You didn't know yourself. Before I read my last poem, I just wanted to thank you, the audience, for being with us tonight and for listening so warmly and responsively. And a special hello to our beloveds watching online. I promised I'd wave. I wore my sparkliest dress, the sparkliest thing I could find on eBay for you at home. And thank you. The poem I'm going to read, I know Backlisted podcast made a bit of fuss of this poem, and I want to thank them for that, and by extension, all those who read and support our poems. I am immensely grateful. Dispatches. My daughter wakes in the deep, dream-ridden dark, hoists herself up by the bars of her cot, and screams into the wall. She's facing the wrong way out. like a sailor lost at the keel of her ship, screaming at the storm. I pick her up and rock her, feel her body soften, warm and heavy, snuffling at my shoulder, then soothing at my neck. I hold her for a while, look back to night shifts at the nursing home where I once worked, its smell of disinfectant and piss, the old women pulling themselves up by their bed guards and crying for their mothers down the dimly lit corridors, like tiny wizened orphans in their long flannel nightgowns, hoarse, bewildered, lost. I'm afraid my daughters will come to this, dragged up by metal hoists to be washed, as all the maps and star charts of their brains dissolve and the near world crumbles out from under them, like white chalk cliffs washing away to a cloud of milk in a black and churning sea. I'm afraid that at the furthest outposts of the self, they'll remember me and call, and I won't be able to come, gone well ahead into the dark and left them alone. My girls, you were pilot lights to me. In the worst storms, how you shone. Let me somehow coalesce in your last firing cells. I hope my arms seem warm to you, and that you hear me tell you how deeply you are loved.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I think you'll agree, a wonderful evening. Our poets will now be available outside to sign their books that you may have bought during the interval. Let's have one more big round of applause for our wonderful signers tonight. And the winner of the T.S. Eliot Prize will be announced tomorrow night. And let's have a round of applause for our readers tonight, our fantastic poets. Thank you and good night.